Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really get into the weeds on fascinating topics. Today we're tackling a case that, well, it didn't just shock Beverly Hills, it completely shattered this idea of the perfect American family.
It really did. It's a story that's just incredibly chilling, profoundly complex, gripped the entire nation back then, and honestly, it still sparks intense debate today.
So let's set the scene. August 20th, 1989, Beverly Hills. What happened?
Well, the piece of this incredibly wealthy neighborhood was just violently broken. Jose and Kitty Menendez, who were, pillars of the community, successful people, they were found brutally murdered.
In their own?
In their own mansion, yeah. Shot multiple times with a shotgun at close range. Apparently, they were just watching TV in their family room.
God, that's horrific.
It was unimaginable. The scene was chaos. Jose had devastating wounds, multiple shots to his head and body. Kitty was shot in the face and leg. It was just extreme violence. Calculated. Investigators were stunned.
But the initial shock, as huge as that was, it was almost immediately overshadowed by something even more disturbing, right? A twist that just spun this whole thing into a different level of complexity.
Exactly. The killers weren't some random intruders, not some phantom menace.
No.
They were the Menendez's own sons, Lyle, who was 21, and Erik, just 18 years old.
Wow. So not just murder, but parricide. Killing your own parents. I mean, that's the ultimate taboo, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that's where the typical crime narrative just completely falls apart. Because the brothers, Lyle and Erik, they didn't deny doing it. They didn't say we weren't there.
Okay, so what did they say?
They claimed self-defense. They argued that they had lived through years, a lifetime, really, of just relentless abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, all at the hands of their parents.
So wait, not self-defense like dad came at me with a knife right now, but something different.
Precisely. Their argument was really novel and challenging for the legal system. They were basically saying that this prolonged systemic abuse created a kind of psychological state, a terror, where this delayed action felt to them like a necessary life-saving measure against this ongoing threat.
That's a huge claim. And it immediately set the stage for just massive controversy, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most divisive trials ever. It forced everyone, society as a whole, to grapple with these incredibly tough questions. Like, what is justice in a situation like this? What's the nature of hidden family abuse? How do you even define self-defense when the person you fear most is your own parent?
It blurred lines people thought were solid. Family sanctity, culpability, everything suddenly seemed murky.
It really did. It shattered assumptions, especially about wealth and family. Before this, the idea of, horrific abuse happening inside a Beverly Hills mansion in that kind of family, it seemed almost impossible to most people.
Right, like wealth protects you from that sort of darkness.
Exactly. But this case forced this really uncomfortable realization that wealth could actually be a shield, not just from public eyes, but maybe even enabling the violence by keeping it hidden. Abuse isn't tied to money, obviously, but privilege can make it much, much harder to spot.
So for this deep dive, what's our mission here? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, our goal is really to unpack all the layers, and there are many layers. We need to look at the murders themselves, the trials, which were incredibly dramatic, both of them, and get into that core debate. Were they cold-blooded killers motivated by greed, or were they victims of just horrific abuse, pushed to an unthinkable breaking point?
And we also want to look at the legacy, right? How this one case actually changed how we think about family violence, how the justice system handles these things. It's a deep dive into the dark side of that American dream.
Okay, so let's start with that dream itself. The Menendez family, from the outside, they really looked like the poster family for success.
Right. Jose Menendez, the father. He had this incredible story, didn't he?
A remarkable story. Cuban immigrant, came to the U.S. with basically nothing but ambition. And he just climbed relentlessly, became this powerful, very wealthy executive in the entertainment industry. He ran live entertainment, a big video distribution company, known as really shrewd, driven, maybe ruthless.
And Kitty, his wife.
Kitty was a former beauty queen, and she seemed to be the architect of this picture-perfect home life for Lyle and Erik. Every signal, every outward sign pointed towards this charmed, perfect existence.
You said they seemed to have it all. We're talking serious privilege here, right? Paint that picture.
Oh, absolutely. Think sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, one of the most exclusive spots on the planet.
Yeah.
Manicured grounds. They had expensive cars, Porsches, Mercedes. The boys wore designer clothes, went on lavish trips, attended elite private schools like Buckley, and Lyle even went to Princeton for a bit.
Wow.
Their life was just cushioned by this immense wealth. From the outside, it genuinely looked like the ideal life. No hint of trouble, no darkness. Just this perfect, shiny facade.
A facade designed to project success and happiness. But behind those gates, behind that polished image, a very, very different story started to emerge.
A profoundly different story. According to the brothers' later testimony, which just stunned people, Jose wasn't just successful. He was, allegedly, deeply controlling and abusive.
How so?
They claimed he ruled the family through fear, intimidation. It wasn't just strictness. They alleged physical violence against Kitty, against both sons, often for, tiny mistakes or things he perceived as disrespect. Beatings, they said, were frequent, brutal, created this constant anxiety.
And then came the most shocking claims.
Yes, this is where it got even darker. Both Lyle and Erik testified under oath that Jose had sexually abused them for years, starting when they were very young boys, continuing right through their childhood, their adolescence.
That's horrifying. Did they give details?
Okay. They did. They described specific instances, this coercive, terrifying power dynamic. They painted a picture of regular beatings, psychological torment, just this pervasive, suffocating climate of fear and shame in the home. And this systemic abuse is what the defense later argued was the catalyst, the reason behind it all.
What about Kitty, the mother? What was her role in all this? According to them, it seems so complicated.
Incredibly complicated and tragic. They claimed she knew about the abuse, but felt completely powerless to stop it, trapped herself.
Also a victim.
Allegedly, yes.
Huh.
A victim of Jose's control and violence, too, living in fear of him, which might explain why she couldn't intervene. The brothers even said she was emotionally unstable, had depression, erratic behavior. Sometimes, they claimed, she even participated in the abuse, maybe as a way to survive, or just turned a blind eye, paralyzed by her own fear.
It raises that awful question. What happens when the people meant to protect you are the source that dare?
Precisely. And the family's wealth, their social standing, it acted like this shield. It made it incredibly difficult for anyone to find out or for the boys to report anything.
They lived in a bubble.
A total bubble of privilege. Appearances were everything. Problems were hidden. They went to these expensive private schools. Nobody there suspected a thing. Why would they? Everything looked perfect. It allowed the abuse, if it was happening as they described, to just fester in secret for years and years.
And the emotional dynamic. You said they claimed it was complex, love and hate mixed together.
Yes, incredibly fraught. Despite everything they alleged, they claimed they still loved their parents. They held on to this maybe naive hope that the abuse would just stop, that things would change.
Did they ever try to tell anyone?
They testified that they did. Tried reaching out maybe to relatives, therapists, but they felt they weren't believed or nobody could really help them. That isolation, being turned away, must have just amplified their desperation enormously.
And Jose's obsession with money. That played a role, too.
According to them, absolutely. It wasn't just a personality trait. He allegedly used it as a weapon. They testified he threatened to cut them out of the will, disown them completely, if they didn't obey him in every way.
So, financial control on top of everything else.
Exactly. Another layer of fear, of dependency, trapping them even more. It was total control, physical, emotional, financial. They felt like they had no escape.
You have to wonder about the psychological toll. Years of that kind of hidden trauma. What does that do to a young mind?
Well, their testimony painted a really stark picture. They claimed severe anxiety, crippling depression, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, where you keep re-experiencing the trauma, you're hypervigilant, your whole sense of safety is just gone.
So the defense argued this created a specific mental state.
Yes, that was key. That the sustained trauma blurred the lines between, typical self-defense and immediate threat and this kind of delayed cumulative response to long-term terror. They brought up things like battered child syndrome, trying to make the case that the brothers were psychologically broken. They became increasingly desperate, hopeless, believing their lives were actually in danger.
And it was that desperation, that feeling of being trapped, that led them to August 20th, 1989.
That's what they claimed. That night, they allegedly reached their breaking point. They felt, according to their testimony, that they had no other choice but to act in self-defense.
Their account of that night.
Yeah.
It was laid out in court, right? Chillingly detailed.
Extremely detailed. They testified they bought the shotguns earlier that day. They admitted planning it, but, and this is crucial to their defense, they insisted the planning wasn't about greed or hate. It was driven by profound fear that their father was going to kill them.
So desperation, terror. They thought their lives were truly on the line.
That was their claim. They described going into the house, finding their parents watching TV. They said their initial plan wasn't even to kill, but to confront Jose, finally make the abuse stop.
But it escalated.
According to them, yes. terrifyingly fast. They claimed Jose became enraged, threatened to kill them right there, and that's when they said they feared for their lives and pulled the triggers.
And the aftermath. We know it was brutal.
Horrific. Jose shot multiple times, head and body, Kitty, face and leg. Multiple shots, close range, just a scene of incredible violence, bloodshed, chaos. The number of wounds really underscored the intensity of it.
And they tried to cover it up, stage it like a robbery.
They did. They alleged this wasn't a calculated move by cold-blooded killers,
Right.
but more like panic. Confused young men not thinking clearly after something so traumatic.
So they got rid of the guns, tried to create alibis.
Exactly. They disposed of the shotguns later found by police, tried to establish they were at the movies, lied to the police about where they were. They maintained this was all driven by fear, not calculated guilt.
But the prosecution saw it very differently.
Very differently. They were deeply skeptical of the self-defense story, the staging explanation. They argued this was far from spontaneous fear. This was meticulously planned murder.
Motivated by
Greed and hatred, pure and simple. Not fear, the planning, the weapons choice, getting rid of the evidence to the prosecution, that all pointed to calculation, to intent.
And their case really hinged on specific pieces of evidence, right? What were the key things?
Several key things. First, buying the shotguns earlier that day, hours before. That screamed premeditation to them.
Premeditation being planning it beforehand.
Exactly. Thinking about it, planning it, even for a short time. That's crucial for a first-degree murder charge. Then, the staging of the crime scene. They argued that wasn't panic. It was a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators, point them away from the real killers.
And the money. That was huge for the prosecution.
Absolutely critical. Jose Menendez was worth millions, around $14 million. Lyle and Erik were the sole heirs, the prosecution said. They killed for the money. Simple as that, to get their hands on the inheritance.
And they disputed the abuse claims entirely.
Vigorously. They called them a fabrication made up after the murders solely to justify them. They argued there was no independent evidence, nothing beyond the brothers' own words. It was, in their view, a cynical ploy to manipulate the jury.
So it really is like two completely different scripts for the same event.
Exactly. Two totally opposing realities presented to the jury, making the truth incredibly hard to pin down.
And that difficulty started right from the initial investigation, didn't it? They first thought it was a robbery.
Initially, yes. That's what the scene suggested, or what the brothers wanted it to suggest. But the police pretty quickly started thinking it was an inside job. Someone who knew the family.
Why? What didn't fit?
The sheer brutality, the close-range shots, the lack of any forced entry. It didn't feel like a typical robbery. It felt personal, pointed to a deeper motive.
And the investigation itself sounds like it was incredibly challenging.
Oh, hugely complex. First, you have the staged crime scene. Police had to figure out what was real versus what was misdirection. That required really careful forensic work.
And the only witnesses were the suspects themselves.
Right. Lyle and Erik were the only ones there, and their stories, even early on, were controversial. They shifted, they contradicted what police were finding elsewhere, made it very hard to trust what they were saying.
So the police really had to dig deep forensically.
Absolutely. Collected everything: blood, fingerprints, ballistics, analyzed shell casings, bullet paths, wound patterns, left no stone unturned. And they interviewed tons of people, friends, neighbors, employees, therapists, trying to piece together the family dynamics, find any clues about motive or behavior.
A massive puzzle with conflicting pieces.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the investigation uncovered the brothers' attempts to cover their tracks, which didn't help their later claims of panic.
Like getting rid of the guns.
Yes, allegedly tossing the shotguns off Mulholland Drive, though police recovered them. Trying to set up fake alibis, claiming they were at the movies. Lying repeatedly to the police about where they were that night. To the prosecution, this just screamed guilt and planning.
So, gradually, the focus shifted squarely onto Lyle and Erik.
Slowly but surely, yes. Finding out they bought those shotguns earlier that day was a huge turning point. That, plus forensic evidence linking them to the scene, like the type of ammo used, really solidified the police suspicion. It wasn't just a theory anymore.
And then came the arrests.
Eventually, yes, they were arrested, charged with murdering their parents. And that arrest just ignited a media firestorm. It wasn't just local news. It went national, international. Became this huge true crime spectacle that dominated headlines for years.
The public was hooked.
Completely captivated. The bizarre nature of it, the wealth, the sons killing the parents. It was sensational.
And the investigation kept digging up more damaging stuff for the prosecution.
It did. police found out about this massive spending spree the brothers went on right after the murders.
Spending spree, while supposedly grieving.
Exactly. Luxury cars. Erik got a new Jeep, Lyle got a Porsche. High-end jewelry, vacations. Lyle even invested in a restaurant. It just didn't look like grieving sons. The prosecution used this heavily to show the financial motive.
Did they try to access the money directly?
Evidence suggested they tried to access bank accounts, trust funds, again, pointing towards that financial motive. Plus, all those interviews with friends, acquaintances, they provided insights into the family's troubled dynamics, the brothers' behavior before and after. It all added up for the investigators.
And then there were the tapes. Psychologist tapes. Those sound crucial.
Hugely controversial, hugely pivotal. Erik had confessed details to his psychologist, Dr. Oziel. Oziel, apparently fearing for his own safety, secretly recorded some sessions.
Is that legal? Patient confidentiality.
Well, there was a massive legal fight over it, but eventually the courts ruled the tapes were admissible, and they contained Erik's detailed confession, talk about staging the crime, and initially no mention of abuse, though later sessions did detail the abuse allegations.
So the tapes cut both ways.
Exactly. Prosecution saw them as proof of guilt and planning. Defense argued they showed the brothers' psychological distress and the abuse history, and the media coverage through all this? Intense.
A double-edged sword, you said.
Definitely. It generated leads, kept public interest high, but it also put immense pressure on police for a quick resolution, maybe before everything was fully understood. And it certainly shaped public opinion. This was becoming one of LA's biggest ever murder cases, involved the FBI, the DA's office, huge resources.
Which leads us to the first trial in 1993, the televised spectacle.
Oh, it was absolutely a spectacle, one of the most controversial trials ever. Court TV, C-SPAN carried it live. Every breakdown, every objection, every piece of testimony played out for the whole country to see. People were glued to it, like the O.J. trial later.
And everyone had an opinion.
Everyone. You couldn't avoid it.
So the prosecution's case in that first trial, straightforward greed.
Clear and simple. They killed for the money. Premeditated murder. Driven by greed and hatred. They laid out the evidence, buying the guns that day, staging the scene, lying to police.
And the spending spree.
Hammered that point home. The cars, the jewelry, all bought right after. Doesn't look like grief, looks like celebrating an inheritance. And they attack the abuse claims hard, called them a fabrication, made up after the fact, no independent proof.
But the defense had this completely opposite story.
Completely opposite. They argued self-defense, born from years of horrific abuse, not cold-blooded killers, but victims. Victims of physical, emotional, sexual abuse by Jose, with Kitty either complicit or helpless.
How did they try to prove that?
Extensive testimony. The brothers themselves gave gut-wrenching accounts. Family, friends, relatives, psychologists. They brought in experts who diagnosed PTSD, severe psychological damage from the alleged abuse. They painted this picture of two young men pushed beyond endurance, acting out of genuine fear for their lives, believing their father would kill them. It was this idea of cumulative self-defense, a really challenging legal argument.
And the nation was divided watching this.
Completely split. Intense debates everywhere. Lots of people thought, they're spoiled brats who killed for money. Just cold-blooded. But many others believed the abuse claims, saw them as tragic victims acting out of desperation. It really forced people to confront the idea that abuse could happen anywhere, even behind mansion walls.
It also put the justice system itself under scrutiny, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle abuse claims from the accused?
Exactly. It highlighted how incredibly difficult it is to find the truth when the only witnesses to the alleged abuse are the defendants and the alleged abusers are dead. How do you corroborate that? How do courts weigh that kind of testimony? It forced a reevaluation.
So what was the outcome of that first trial?
A mistrial. The jury couldn't agree. They were deadlocked. Some jurors believed it was murder, swayed by the planning and money evidence. Others believed the self-defense argument, finding the abuse claims credible enough to raise reasonable doubt about murder.
A reflection of the national split, right there in the jury room.
Perfectly mirrored it. The ambiguity was just too much for them to reach a unanimous decision.
So, on to round two.
Yeah.
The second trial started in 1995. What was different?
Two key differences. First, it was not televised. That changed the whole atmosphere. Much less media frenzy, less of a circus. The idea was the jury could focus just on the evidence without the outside noise.
Did it work?
Well, the prosecution also came back with a more refined strategy. They'd learned from the first trial. They focused more tightly on the hard evidence, less maybe on the emotional stuff.
Their core argument was the same, though.
Essentially, yes, but presented more sharply. They really hammered the timeline, buying the guns that morning, the staging of the scene, presented that as undeniable premeditation. They emphasized the spending spree again, clear financial motive, and the lies to the police showed consciousness of guilt. They tried to build this very clear, logical case for first-degree murder.
And the defense. How did their case fare the second time?
Similar arguments about abuse and self-defense, but it seemed less effective. Maybe it was the lack of cameras, maybe just the specific jury. But they seemed less receptive to the abuse claims.
Less sympathetic.
Appeared that way. Without the raw emotion of the televised testimony, maybe the claims didn't hit as hard. The jury seemed more focused on that evidence of planning, the guns, the cover-up. The Oziel tapes also remained a point of contention, arguably hurting the defense narrative more this time. It was harder for the defense to overcome the prosecution's focused case.
And the verdict this time?
Guilty. Convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The jury decided it was planned, intentional killing with malice aforethought.
And the sentence?
Life in prison without any possibility of parole. They're still incarcerated today. All appeals exhausted.
And the reaction to that verdict? Still divided.
Still very divided. Lots of people felt justice was finally served, that they got what they deserved. But others felt strongly that the system failed victims of abuse, that their trauma wasn't properly considered, and the conviction was unfair. They remained tragic figures to many.
This case clearly left a huge mark long after the verdicts. Its legacy. It really changed things, didn't it?
It had a massive, lasting impact. On the justice system, on how we perceive family violence, it starkly showed how hard it is to determine truth when abuse is alleged, especially when the main witnesses are the accused and the alleged abusers are gone. It forced a real rethink.
And the media aspect.
Absolutely. It kind of set the template for intense televised trial coverage, for better or worse, but it also significantly raised awareness about family violence, brought it out of the shadows onto the national stage, highlighted the desperate need for better support for victims who often suffer in silence.
It touched on mental health and criminal responsibility, too.
Definitely. The PTSD claims, the arguments about psychological damage. It forced courts and the public to grapple with how trauma might influence actions and whether it lessens guilt. That's a complex legal and psychological debate that continues. It also pushed for more sensitive handling by law enforcement when dealing with abuse claims.
Did the family's wealth play into the legacy discussions?
Yes, it raised questions about socioeconomic status. Did their privilege affect the investigation, the trial, public perception? Did it shield them initially or make them bigger targets later? And forensically, it showed the importance of deep investigation, like finding those discarded guns when you don't have clear witnesses.
So, wrapping this up.
Yeah.
The Menendez brothers case is still one of the most talked about, most divisive cases ever.
Without a doubt. The story's sons killing parents, claiming abuse, it just keeps raising these really difficult, uncomfortable questions about justice, about hidden abuse, about what self-defense even means inside a family.
And what makes it so enduring isn't just the horror, but those fundamental questions about the system itself.
Exactly. How does the justice system handle abuse allegations when the evidence is so tangled, when the only witnesses are the accused perpetrators? That core difficulty, that investigative dilemma, it still challenges our legal system today.
It really serves as this powerful reminder, doesn't it? The need for thorough investigation, for sensitivity with abuse claims.
Absolutely. It showed just how incredibly complex these cases are. Underscores the need for better understanding, better support for abuse victims who are often hidden, suffering silently, sometimes until tragedy strikes.
So the final thought here. The Menendez story isn't just crime and punishment, it's deeper.
Much deeper. It's a dive into the dark side of family life, the complexities of psychology under extreme pressure, and this enduring mystery of truth and justice. It's that stark reminder. Perfect exteriors can hide the darkest secrets. And that line between victim and perpetrator, well, it's often not nearly as clear as we wish it were. It really makes you wonder, what kind of hell does someone have to endure to see killing their parents as the only way out? And how do we truly account for that silent suffering when the final act is so violent?